All right, today I'm gonna go in depth and show you exactly how I approach fish, control the boat, and make accurate casts when I'm using my Garmin Livescope. And in this video, I'm gonna give you a ton of overhead views on how my boat's sitting compared to structure, compared to fish, and how exactly I'm moving this with the wind and with other factors to be able to give myself the best opportunity to present my baits in a way that they are gonna get bit. And this is actually the third video in a series that I've titled Mastering Livescope. I'll put the other two links at the end of this video if you're interested in checking those out as well. And before I actually start fishing, I'm just gonna talk through a few things that I take into consideration when I'm setting up on fish, on structure, on whatever that is. And first and most importantly is the wind. Obviously, if you've ever viewed forward-facing sonar, you know wind can play a big factor. And so for me, typically, it's not uncommon, a lot of people do this. Typically I want to work into the wind if at all possible. If you work into the wind, that is the easiest way to stay controlled, to not drift over fish, and to keep those fish in your sights as you're moving. However, sometimes if you're on a big body of water or if it's just blowing that hard, you're not able to move and cover enough water if you're working into the wind. So in those situations, I will also go with the wind. Now that is a situation where if you have those crappie breaks or whatever they're called, where you can slow your boat down and you can keep your forward-facing sonar looking at the fish, because it can be very challenging to get your bait in front of those fish as you're either drifting over top of them or drifting to the side. So either circle around or you have to stop yourself and then you're taking your transducer off of those fish. So we're gonna get a little more into that later, but that wind is probably one of the most important factors when I am making decisions on how I'm approaching areas that are holding fish. The second thing that I take into consideration is location, or just how these fish are setting up. And sometimes you won't know that until you're actually fishing. But if they're on a larger flat suspended, that's a time that I'm going to move quicker. I'm going to zoom out so I can cover a lot of water. I don't necessarily have to be in a very specific line. I'm just covering a lot of water, trying to hit over these large areas and see where these fish are hanging out. Once I piece some things together, I might be able to get a more specific line. But to start, I'm just going to cover water, zoom out, and move fast. Sometimes they might be structure oriented, or they might be in a more specific area. That is when I slow down, I zoom in, and I take some time to examine it a little bit more. So depending on the location, depending on their setup, that is gonna be another factor going into my decision-making process. The third one is the presentation that I'm using. If I'm using a lighter jig, a lot of times I'll have to slow down and be a little bit more meticulous with how I'm targeting these fish. If I'm using a big heavy bait, like I am gonna be doing today, then I can afford to move a little faster because that bait's gonna get down. Those fish are hopefully gonna be a little bit more aggressive and I can move quickly. One of the last things that I take into consideration is just gonna be the mood of the fish, and that's gonna be something you're gonna have to fish for a little bit that day to see, and that might change even from hour to hour. So if the fish are aggressive, that's when I can either use a bigger bait, a faster moving bait, more of a reaction bait, and I can move quickly and get my bait in front of a lot of fish. If they're a little more lethargic, that's when I'll have to slow down, downsize my bait, get a little more meticulous in getting that bait right in front of their face. And sometimes, whether the fish are lethargic or aggressive, they can be moving quickly. So you're gonna have to kind of chase them down. And if that's the case, then you're gonna wanna take more time to identify which direction they're moving and try to cast ahead of them. So just wanted to kind of set the stage on some of the factors that I work into my decision-making process before we get going, as I kind of explained. Now I'm gonna hop up on the trolling motor. We're gonna start fishing some of the areas and I'll talk through exactly how I'm setting up on each specific area. All right, so I'm coming up on the first spot here, and I was actually driving from that direction. But since the wind is blowing this way, I circled around this piece of structure. This is a midlake hump. And so midlake humps are really nice because you can kind of approach them in any way. You don't have to worry about any sort of land or shoreline. You kind of approach them in any way. So I circled around this hump. There's kind of a couple humps. There's kind of like one shallower part, one deeper part. There's a flat in between. And so there's a couple different ways to do this. There's one stretch that is long, and unfortunately, the way the wind is here, it is perpendicular to the long part. Obviously, if you're gonna work over a hump, that's kind of a longer, narrower hump, being able to work into the wind over the whole thing is ideal. So here I am, and I'm gonna be working perpendicular. So there's a couple different ways I can do this. I can either go over it, come back, go over it, come back, go over it, and kind of break it apart that way. Or what I will likely do is I will go to some of my high percentage areas. So I'll start on one end where maybe there's a point or a high point or some sort of piece of interest that's maybe going to be a higher traffic area, and I will work towards that point, and then I'll kind of drift back and go sideways a little bit. I don't always love going sideways, but again, working these heavier baits, it's a little easier to do. But then if I do see fish, it's easy to turn around and set up on. With this situation, I think that's what I'm going to do, be a little more efficient, hitting some of those high percentage areas and resetting myself every time to make sure when I get to those areas that I feel like are going to hold more fish, I am working them into the wind. And if I see fish in the meantime, I'll either cast on them because I am working this heavier bait, or I will reset to make sure that I'm coming across these fish in a way that I can control the boat. Once I work over this hump, then I'll kind of work over that flat and kind of show you how I will work that a little bit differently. All right, so just pulling up to the first area. This is essentially a tip on this hump. And again, I'm kind of perpendicular to this hump, but I wanted to be able to work into this high percentage area into the wind instead of perpendicular. So I kind of went off the deeper side of it, then worked my way towards this hump. That one didn't want to play. Let's see if these ones will. This one might. Ooh, started following, and then he gave up. There we have one straight out in front here. Couple. Let's see if this guy will do it. Come on. Yep, this guy's got to do it. There he bit, right underneath. And so like I was trying to say, and then I saw a good fish, so I couldn't think. This one, this is working over this big flat, so I'm not as particular about what I, like the direction. I'm just kind of working over these fish. Decent fish. Just kind of working over these flats. I'll show you this off quick and then I'll keep talking. There we go. A solid start to the day here. Oh. And so, like I was saying earlier, I started out working kind of off the edge of that hump, and I saw a couple fish, didn't really get anything to bite, and so I worked kind of focusing on some of those high points and the edges and the tips on it, and nothing was really happening. So I decided to move around this hump, so I kind of circled around where it gets to kind of this flat, where before it gets to those other humps. And so I started by working on the back side of this because they will still hang out adjacent to some of those break lines, even if they're on this flat. That's where that one was. You know, this is like a 25 to 30 foot flat out in here. And so working off the break line, and I was kind of working that edge first before I head upwind. And so, well, even though I was working kind of crosswind, when I actually wanted to get set up on that fish, I let myself drift around so I could be casting in front into those fish. And this wind is getting stronger, so it's making it a little tricky. Hopefully you'll be able to see some of the Livescope footage still. But we're gonna keep now working over this flat before we get to a couple of these other like little high points or humps on this. All right, we got a few actually out here. We're gonna start with this closer one. It's up a little bit higher. Sometimes those higher ones are a little more willing to eat. We'll see how this guy reacts. And then, so essentially I have that, whoa, this guy's already coming up. Started to at least. I thought he was gonna come up and crush it. Come on. Come on, he's on it. Was on it, finished the deal. There we go, finished the deal. And so, again, what I did, there's this flat, and I'm basically working this flat, kind of zigzagging a little bit, but mostly going towards another little bit of a hump. So it's this flat in between these two humps. And so working my way, zigzagging. Hello. It's getting a little windier, as you can see, which is gonna make boat control harder, but that much more important. Another decent fish there. Oh, But like I said, just working over this flat. I don't need to be as particular. You know, as I get closer to that hump, I'll get more particular about trying to hit the high percentage area these fish are gonna be. But for now, there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason. Just kind of working back and forth in a little bit of a shallow S and trying to get my bait in front of as many fish. If I need to reposition, I'll reposition. But again, just to kind of give you a little reference of what I'm using. I'm using a larger paddle tail. This is a 1/2 ounce smelt nader with a Norfin paddle shad. This is something that gets up and down relatively quickly. So again, even in a really windy day like this, I can still get up and down and I'm not gonna be as worried about needing to get set up. You know, if I was using say a 1/4 and an 1/8 ounce jig in this wind, now I'm gonna need to be very particular about getting around these fish and trying to get my cast directly at them. But we're gonna keep moving, hopefully catch a couple more and then kind of show you how I'll set up on that next hump. Another one on this flat, just kind of hanging out a few feet off bottom. Try to cast beyond it a little bit. This one actually worked out good. I was working directly into this wind and it's there. Whoop. Sometimes I will give a little bit of a bump before I get to that fish or before my bait gets down there. So that way I don't have to be as heavy on the pedal when it's there. This guy sees it already. Come on. They're definitely not crushing it immediately like they do sometimes. They're kind of looking, and I'll kind of read its mood. Now that it's coming up a little faster, I'll pull up a little faster. Ooh, and this guy didn't love that. So I'll kind of let it sit here for a sec, kind of see what this guy does. Didn't love it, didn't love it. All right, so like I was saying, I'm working my way to that other little hump, and this is that flat that's in between. So essentially I'm doing like a shallow S, little bit back and forth, trying to see where I'm seeing some fish. If I see something, like I'm seeing some fish here, I'm typically gonna be looking for something a little bit bigger or maybe something that's higher up in the water column. So I'm gonna keep bypassing some of these, but I'll make a shallow S back and forth. And then once I kind of get to this next hump, this one doesn't necessarily have a high percentage area where it's like a point or a nice little flat shelf that leads into it. This one's honestly almost like a little perfect circle. And so I don't need to be as particular about where the angle that I'm taking, where I'm going at it. So I'm just gonna kind of keep S-ing back and forth, and then I'll try to hit basically right on top of that next little hump. There we go, we got another one hanging out down there. Try to do as many adjustments as possible before so I can do my best. One of the things you'll notice that I do sometimes in my videos that a lot of other guys don't is I'll use my remote for some of like the micro adjustments. And that's not because that's a secret tactic, I'm better than them. That is because I am not as confident using my foot pedal. Some of these guys have a lot more experience and they're a lot better than me. Just being 100% transparent, I did not grow up doing any bass fishing or using a cable drive. And so here's where we're at. This one feels okay. Again, this is just that flat leading out to the next hump. Feels a touch bigger. Took a little bit, but I was able to get that cast, kind of lead it up. And again, as you're reading these fish, read their mood. If they start moving a little faster, I typically start moving a little faster to give them a little bit more of a reason to bite. Let's see. That's a step in the right direction. Step in the right direction with that fish. Ooh, I was way cockeyed here. Hopefully, there. Hopefully it stays straight now. All right, nice meaty one here, just thick. And you could tell on that fight. So again, just working this flat towards that second hump. We're just about there, but honestly, there's almost been more fish on this flat than on some of the structure. So we'll see what this pattern plays out. All right, so we just got, are just getting done with that flat, working towards this hump. Basically I did, like I said, S's till I got to it. This one, however, is not a big hump. So I can basically, if I go over top, I'll see from one edge of it to the next, especially if I zoom out a touch. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna zoom out a touch, work over top of this, see if we see some fish up high, working off the edge. But I have been seeing fish more on some of these flats versus on some of this structure. So we'll see see what this one looks like. See a suspended guy. So I saw some smaller stuff on top of that hump, but nothing I super wanted to cast at. So we do see a suspended guy up over here that looks a touch bigger. Woo. Let's see what we got. 40, 50 feet. Try to cast beyond it a little bit. Come on. Make some readjustments before I get down to him. Ooh, this guy started doing things I like. Yep, that guy came up like he's supposed to. Hopefully that means he's not pikey. So again, worked over top of that smaller hump, just wasn't seeing as many fish. So got to this little deeper edge of the flat. This is starting to feel pikey. Got a little deeper edge of the flat, found some more fish suspended. Nope, it's a walleye. It's a walleye. Not super big, so I'll just show that one off here. So the next thing I am going to do is show something a little bit different, just to show you how you can approach it in a different way. I still have more of this flat behind me that I haven't hit that's in between these two humps. So I'm actually gonna go, 100 to 500 yards to the one side of it, and I'm gonna work this hump back into the wind, and I'll kind of show you how I work these fish when I am working into the wind like this. So now I have the wind in my back and I'm actually going with the wind, which is nice because I can cover ground a lot quicker. But when I see a fish, it's gonna be a little more challenging. So there's 3 different ways that I can do this. One, since I'm using a heavier bait like this, I can see a fish and I can cast on it right away and try to just basically get down before I go over top of it or before I go too much to the side. The second thing that I can do is I can go in reverse, hit the trolling motor, slow me down, and then kind of readjust and see myself or find the fish again. The one challenge with that is when you do stop yourself, you take your transducer off of that fish, and then it might be tough to find it again. That's where those crappie brakes or whatever they're called that are on the back that you can just slow yourself down would be super nice. But that is not something that I've invested in yet. The other thing is to go around, either go over top of those fish and then kind of circle around. Preferably if you don't go right over top, then that's ideal. But basically do that, circle around, and then kind of set up on these fish. So if I see a fish, I'll kind of see how it's set up, and depending on how it's set up, I might do one of those 3 options. All right, so since this one's a little more to the side, I'm not as at risk for going over top of it, so I'm actually just gonna cast, show you that example. I did cast to the left of it a little bit though, because I knew the wind was gonna be pushing my line a little bit, even with this heavier bait. So now I should be pretty darn close to it, now that it drifted a little bit. Let's see if this guy will react. Didn't get quite down to it far enough. Ooh, there he reacted. Jeez, that guy came up. You didn't see it the first time? Oh, I didn't see it the first time, but that second time he came up and smoked it. You can see how just a slight change in angle can sometimes be the difference between these fish biting or not. That one, it was to my side, so I didn't want to drift over it. Whoa. Or I wasn't at risk of drifting over it, so I figured I could just cast on it and just kind of work the boat to get the angle that it's going to stay in the line, just adjusted for the wind, adjusted for a little bit of the boat drift. Decent fish here, at least fighting good. You can see once that guy decided to bite, he bit. It was like nothing right away. Ooh, that's a solid fish. That's a solid fish. Stay pinned for me. Another decent one, you bet. All right, let's see what we got. This one comes in at just barely touching 28. That is what we're out here for. Oh, beauties. So, again, I don't know, sometimes when I'm actually fishing, I don't communicate as clearly, so I'll try talk through that again. That one was to my left, and since I wasn't at risk of going over it, basically I just compensated for my drift and compensated for the wind. So that fish was to my side, casted to the left of that fish, And then by the time the wind pushed my bait and by the time my boat drifted over, that fish was right there. So those are two examples. One, just getting down quickly so I don't go over top of it. And two, casting right at that fish and just compensating for the drift. If we see another one, we're just about done with this flat. If we see another one, I'll show you how I'll stop, circle around, but I've done that a couple times. So we'll keep working down that flat and see what the next fish presents if we see another one. Okay, this is not textbook. I didn't even talk about it because it's probably not what I should be doing, but I was just about to leave this spot. I was gonna circle around like I probably should, but I saw this thing, and sometimes with these heavier jigs, I get a little impatient because I know they can get down quickly. So I'm not even gonna explain how this one was set up, but basically I was just drifting over top of it and I kind of ripped it back behind, kind of like a quartering cast. Which, if you know anything about scoping, those can be very challenging ones, but I ended up coming across this guy and whoa, so hopefully I don't go in the drink. We got another solid fish. All right, we got another one right in that 26-inch range or so, but we're actually gonna stop, call it a video after that first spot because we already covered quite a bit just on that first spot, and I realize it's already probably going to be a pretty long video. So we'll do this as maybe a first part of this boat control talk. If you would like to see something else specifically related to boat control, let me know in the comments. If you want to see maybe weeds or maybe shoreline points or whatever it might be, drop those in the comment if you have any other questions on some boat control stuff. Otherwise, if you'd like to see the first video in this series, I'll put that one up here. Second video will be right up here. Also, if you have anything else Livescope related that you'd like to see me cover, any questions, drop those in the comments as well. Otherwise, as always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.